Well, thanks for joining in on the class today called Writing Your Data Management Plan. Um, I hope that this will clear up any questions you have about writing data management plans for your grant applications in the future. And I'm always available to help if you need specific questions answered as well with when you get into the process of writing a data management plan. My name is Chris Eaker. I'm assistant professor in the libraries. Data curation librarian is my title, and my office is in Hodges Library in room 236. And there's my contact information. If you ever need to reach me, you're welcome to send me an email, and also take a moment to visit my my research guide on data services, which talks about all the things that I do and provides access to data sources that we have, and also some tips on data management and data management plans. So if you want to take some time to check that out later today, please take a moment to do that. So today's class is about writing a data management plan, and as you're well aware, the data management plan is a requirement for most grant funding agencies today, and it is usually a two-page document that you will send along with your grant proposal, and it is reviewed along with the proposal. And so today is going to be talking about what kind of things do you need to include in that plan in order to meet those requirements. So first of all, what is a data management plan? Simply put, it is a document that explains the what, why, how, who, when, and where for managing, sharing, and preserving research data. So we'll go through these different aspects of what the data management plan should include. The data lifecycle shown here, this was adapted from the Data One project, which is an NSF-funded project. This model just typically shows the typical life cycle that data on a research project would go through. It is just intended to show you the different phases, kind of for you to think through the process and to view it from the data's life as opposed to the research project's life. Not every project is going to go through every one of these phases, and not every phase is going to go. You're not going to go through every phase in the same linear process that this model might imply, but it just kind of gives you some things to think about. And kind of in a broad level, the data management plan is intended to address how you intend to manage data in each of these phases of the data life cycle. So we will go through these in more detail as we go through today. Who requires data management plans? Within the last few years, data management plans have become required by most grant funding agencies. The National Science Foundation, of course, and that one, the NSF has been requiring data management plans since 2011. The National Endowment for the Humanities, the Office of Digital Humanities in particular, is the one that requires data management plans. National Institutes of Health currently requires something called a data sharing plan, which is slightly different from a data management plan, but it is similar enough that we include it here. U.S. Geological Survey and the U.S. Departments of Energy, Transportation, Defense, Justice, Education, and Agriculture, the National Food and Agriculture section of that in particular, as well as NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, all require data management plans. But that's not all. The Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, also the Joint Fire Science Program, Institute for Museum and Library Services, and also the private foundations, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So If your favorite grant funding agency is not on this list, chances are good that they do require a data management plan, but I just didn't include them. But if they don't require one now, then they probably will in the future. So what should a data management plan include? Of course, you're going to talk about the data. That's obvious. You're going to talk about the people that are involved in the research project, from everyone who is involved in helping manage the data. You'll also talk about metadata, which is information about the data and how it's collected, and information on variables and instrumentation and things like that. Security measures that you will employ to make sure that your data is secure and doesn't get breached. And any access, sharing, and reuse issues, you'll address those as well. And also, how do you intend to preserve the data at the end of the research project? So these are the six main parts of a data management plan, and we will go through each of these in more depth and talk a little bit more about what each of these parts should include. I'll also give you some examples along the way. So on the first part of the data management plan, we talk about the data. So starting out, you'll talk about what kinds of data do you intend to create on your research project. And what I mean by what kinds is, will it be mostly textual information? Will it be mostly numerical, tabular type information? Or will it be mostly digital images or audio files or models or software code? That's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about what kinds of data. And then they want you to give an estimate, and this is just an estimate of how much data you intend to generate. Of course, you may not have any idea, but you can probably come up with some conservative estimate about how much data you plan to generate. And this is in terms of gigabytes and terabytes, things like that. What file types do you intend to use, from Excel files or doc files or specialized files that might be generated by softwares and instrumentations you use in your lab, statistical package files like SPSS, stuff like that. This is what they want to know. What type of file, what file types will you be generating? And then how do you intend to organize all those files during the project? It's always a good idea to come up with an organizational scheme at the beginning of your project, so you're not kind of scrambling and organizing files in a haphazard way throughout the project. This is an example of the data portion of a data management plan. And I want to just point out some specific parts of this that meet the requirements that I outlined previously. You'll see here that this one talks about generating raw CO2 measurements, meteorological data, calibration, and reference standards. So this is the actual types of data that this project would generate. And then they go on to say that they're going to be placed in comma separated values files in plain ASCII format. So that's a CSV file, which is a numerical form of data. So that addresses the file types question. And it says here it's going to occupy less than 500 kilobytes of raw and ancillary data, and it'll be distributed on request, and it will comprise less than 10 megabytes. So this is addressing the how much data do you plan to generate question. And then they talk a little bit about organization. It's saying the final data file will contain dates for each observation, time, day, month, and year. So that's just a very brief mention of how the files will be organized, and this is by date. I would like to see more information on this data management plan about how they plan to organize the files. So how do they, are they going to organize everything by date, or is it going to be organized by observation site, or is it going to be organized by some other way? This is a little bit more information about that would be better for this particular example. But it's a good example. It addresses all the main parts of that data portion of the data management plan pretty well. I'm also willing to take questions, of course. If anytime during this presentation you have a question, you can pop into the chat box and just type your question, and I'll stop periodically and check it and make sure that, see if there's any questions that I need to address. Here's another example of a data management plan about the portion of the data management plan. And this one right here just really just addresses one part of it, and that is the types of data that they intend to generate, text and field notes and digital photographs and video recordings. So everything is really just is textual in this, and also photographs and video recordings. So there's not going to be any numerical files. And this is probably social science data set that's, it's got a lot of interviews and things like that. So it's not numerical. So they should have included more information on the file types that they plan to generate and how much of the data they plan to generate, and also how they intend to organize those files through the project. Moving to the next section, the section that talks about people, and that you want to talk about who is involved in your research project. And this is everyone from the PI to any graduate students, who else might be involved, a data manager in particular. You want to spell out what their roles are going to be. All right, you'll mention so-and-so is going to be is the PI, so-and-so is the data manager, so-and-so is whatever role is in charge for, say for someone's in charge of cleaning the data sets and all the things that go into quality control. What are they responsible for? This is where you talk about what aspects of the data management plan are different people going to be responsible for. So who's responsible for cleaning the data, who's responsible for making sure the data gets backed up on a regular basis, and things like that. And then you also want to address a transition plan. So if someone leaves the project and someone else joins in to replace them, how are you going to ensure that the data management gets completed in a seamless manner? Here's an example of a data management plan for the people section. This one addresses the people involved in the project. It talks about the PI and the co-PI. There may be other people that are going to be involved, but they just mentioned these two. And then it talks about these people's responsibilities and what they're actually going to be doing. And so items 1 through 5 are the different things that they're going to be doing. The paragraph that comes after item number 5 is simply just a restatement of those 5 items. So, and then also they talk about transfer of the data. So this is talking about kind of the transition plan, although it doesn't address how data will be transitioned before it's transferred to the long-term custodianship of this anthropological archive. So I would have liked to see them show some more information about how they intend to address the transition plan prior to transferring the data to that AAA data registry. But this addresses who's involved and what their responsibilities are, and then it's just a little bit about the transition. The next section that you're going to want to talk about is metadata. And metadata is essentially it's data about the data itself. So it's information that will help you in the future and someone else in the future who was not so intimately involved in the project understand what the data mean, how they were collected, what the project was all about, the conditions under which data were collected and information, that kind of thing. So this image is a good saying. Metadata is a love note to the future because it does help you understand your data in the future as well as others who were not involved in the project. So the questions you want to address in this section about metadata is how will you describe your data? And how will you describe your research project overall? And is there a specific metadata standard that you plan to use? There are metadata standards that would be better for different disciplines of data. There's also more general metadata standards. So if you don't have a discipline-specific metadata standard that you are comfortable using or familiar with, a general metadata standard such as Dublin Core would be a good option for you. And I'm happy to help understand how to create a metadata record using Dublin Core or any other specific discipline-specific metadata standard. There are a few that I'm aware of that I can help with. There's for ecological data, there's the ecological metadata language. For geographic data sets, there is the content standard for digital geographic metadata, and there's also an ISO standard that came after that, which are specific for geographic data sets. And then there's social science data sets, metadata, and the one in particular I'm referring to is called the Data Documentation Initiative. But Dublin Core is a very general one that doesn't, it's not specific to any particular discipline. So here's some examples from a data management plan where they address how they plan to use metadata. So in this particular, this first example here, that they talk about how they're going to create contextual information about the data in a text-based document, and also in an ISO 19115 standard metadata with an XML format. And that ISO standard reference there is the geographic standard that I referenced earlier, that's similar to the content standard for digital geographic metadata. Additionally, the second example says that they plan to create metadata using the DDI metadata standard and XML format, and that is the Data Documentation Initiative metadata standard, which is most typically used for social science related data sets that involve surveys and interviews. And if you need any help in and learning more about these metadata standards, or if you're curious whether or not there's a metadata standard that would work better within your particular discipline, please reach out and I'm happy to investigate that for you. There are just so many metadata standards, it's hard to know. It's hard to know all about them. So I'm happy to investigate that for you and work with you in learning more about it. The next section of your data management plan is going to address the security of the research data. And this is in particular very important when you're dealing with human subjects research. How do you plan to protect your subjects' privacy and confidentiality of the data sets? And also, what is your backup plan when you want to make sure that you don't lose all of your hard work? And then in your backup plan, you want to address where you plan to back up your data and how often you plan to back up your data. And just general terms, and these recommendations may change a bit depending on the discipline, but in general terms, my recommendation for backup plans is that you create 3 copies of your research data. And the first copy of your data can be on a local hard drive, like in your office hard drive or your lab computer hard drive. So that's a local and internal backup, and that's internal to the computer. And then A second copy could be a local and external copy of the data, and typically I recommend an external hard drive for your second local copy. I do not recommend CDs or DVDs, and I don't recommend USB thumb drives because they're easy to lose, and they're also and CDs and DVDs are easy to break and scratch, and over time they tend to lose the ability to hold on to the data. That phenomenon is called bit rot. So I recommend an external hard drive for your second copy. And then the third copy, I always recommend you using an external and non-local backup. And that a good option for that would be cloud storage. And in particular here at UT, I recommend our university's OneDrive system. OneDrive is the Microsoft cloud storage system, which OIT provides to you as a UT student and faculty or staff member, and you get, I believe it's you get up to 1 terabyte of data free, but you can always request that to be increased. And as an individual, you can get it increased up to 5 terabytes, but you can also request OIT to create a lab or a research group account for you, and then they will, I think they will give you up to 25 terabytes in that situation. So you've got quite a bit of storage. And the reason I recommend UT's OneDrive system as opposed to our Google Drive system is because OneDrive is HIPAA compliant, it's also FERPA compliant, and it's personally identifiable information compliant. So there's special safeguards that OIT has demanded on OneDrive, and they are compliant with all those special situations. So OneDrive is easy for you to access. So if you need help in understanding how to use OneDrive, let me know and I can help you out with that. And then when you talk about how often your data should be backed up, and that's just really going to be different for every project. If your research project generates data, let's say on a weekly basis, you collect new data like every once a week, well then once a week is often enough to back up your data. If, however, you are generating data on a continuous basis on a certain instrument in your lab, then you're going to want a much more frequent backup plan than once a week. So it's just going to depend on how often you're generating data. And, and quite frankly, if you lose data, how much data are you willing to lose at one time? If you're generating data every day, you don't want to lose a week's worth of data. So that covers the security part of the data management plan. And let's move on. And this is also important. So this will be addressed back in the people portion. And this, who's responsible for making sure that the backup plan gets done on a regular basis. So moving on to access, sharing, and reuse. This is another section of the data management plan. This is how do you plan to provide access to your research data? And this is, you can address this in one of two ways. You can address it like during the project. How do you plan to provide access to all the people involved during the research project, and also after the project when you've kind of finalized everything and you want to make this data publicly available, which is a requirement for most of your grants. Then how do you plan to provide access? Are you going to specify any limitations on the access of the data or how that data can be used? If so, then you would want to spell that out in this portion of the data management plan. And then I also encourage you to describe briefly about who else would be interested in reusing this research data were you to share it with someone else. So this is kind of like the broader scope of the research and how other disciplines might be able to reuse your research data in other ways. So just think outside the box and get creative. Here's an example of the data sharing and reuse portion. This talks about how this box shows how they plan to make the data available. They'll share it via data updates as CSV files from a central relational database. They will also archive this research data in the U of M Digital Conservancy, which is an archive for digital preservation. And they plan to do this within 1 year of publication. So this is how they plan to provide data after the research project is finished and they're making the data publicly available. Another example, this one demonstrates that they will provide access to the tools and software generated using web-based applications. And then this talks about the limitations on reuse. They will be transferred to others under the terms of a material transfer agreement. So if that kind of thing is applicable to your research project, then you want to spell that out here. Some additional information that they want data reusers to know is they want the data to be cited, and they give a suggested citation. And it looks like this may have been an early draft of the data management plan where they just put in some placeholders for dates and URLs, but in the final version you would spell out all the information that you want included in that citation specifically. And this last section is some information about who they intend to be other users of the data, and so what other types of research collaborators and other disciplines might be willing or interested in reusing this data in other research. So the final section of your of your data management plan will be talking about how you plan to preserve the research data. And this can be accomplished in a number of ways. A lot of times I see on data management plans, the researcher will say they plan to preserve it on the PI's website or on their lab's website, and it's not a best practice. It's not a good way to do that, and so I don't recommend you sharing and preserving research data on a website, because websites are not intended for long-term preservation. So I would recommend you locate a discipline-specific data repository that would be data that is similar to the type of data that you plan to share. If you don't know of one or can't find one that is suitable for your data, then UT's own institutional repository called Trace would be a good option for you. And so we are more than willing to preserve research data within Trace, and we can provide a DOI to that data set, which helps in discoverability and citation of the data. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about how to preserve research data within Trace, or if you need help in locating a suitable discipline-specific repository for your data. I'm always happy to help with that. Here's an example from a data management plan, and this one in particular just simply states where they plan to archive their research data upon completion of the project. And this one is going to use the Odum Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and the Odum Institute is a social science data repository. Another social science data repository that we can make use of here at UT is called ICPSR, which stands for the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. That is based out of the University of Michigan. We at UT we subscribe as a member to the ICPSR, and therefore we can also use it as archiving for data sets from UT researchers. So if you have any questions about how to use that, let me know, or how to put data on Trace, I'm happy to help you with that as well. So that is that's all the sections of the data management plan. Depending on the agency that you plan to apply to, those sections may be slightly different. They may be called something different, or may have slightly different requirements, but that is generally how you would create a data management plan. Now, I wanted to show you this tool, and normally at this point in the presentation, I would pop into the DMP tool, which is an online tool we make available to you to demonstrate how to use the tool to create a data management plan. Now, the DMP tool is a free resource that walks you through step-by-step how to create a data management plan for over 30 different grant funding agencies. And so it's a really helpful tool. However, the DMP tool is undergoing a transformation, and as of next Tuesday, they're going to have a completely new version of the DMP tool. And so going to the DMP tool today to demonstrate how you use it is really pointless, because next Tuesday it's going to be a completely different interface and completely different steps to use the tool. But what I will do is once that new version comes out, and it's going to be much better than the current version, which already is pretty good, what I'll do is create a video on how to use the new DMP tool, and then I will put it up on my website and send everyone a link so that you can go through and watch that yourself and see how to use the tool. What I'm hoping, and the current tool has the capability of allowing you to submit your data management plan to me for feedback, and I would imagine that the new version of the tool will have the same functionality. So that's a really great feature, and I have the ability to go in and review the data management plan and provide some feedback to you, and ways that you might be able to improve it, or some things you might want to change. So at this point, there's really no point in going and demonstrating the tool, but just be aware of it. And when the new tool comes out, I will create a video on how to use it and send you a link. Now I want to plug the session that's coming up next week. This session today was on how to make the data management plan. So that's what you submit along with your grant proposal. And then when you get the grant, hooray, congratulations, now you have to start doing the work. And so this next class, next Tuesday, is about how to manage data. And this is data management best practices. So, the ongoing day-to-day best practices of managing research data. So we'll talk about file naming and organization schemes, some file versioning tips, some pros and cons of databases versus spreadsheets, how to use metadata appropriately, some more depth on backup and security plans, and much more. So I would encourage you to pop over to this link, this tinyutk.edu/best practices, and register for the Data Management Best Practices class, which will be online via Zoom next Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And before we wrap up, I want to give a plug to the Scholars Collaborative, which is a group of librarians and staff in Hodges Library who help with digital research in all its forms. So we have a scholarly communication librarian, Rachel Caldwell, who can help with any questions you might have about publishing, issues around copyright, how to choose the most appropriate journal for your work, and how to avoid journals that are predatory. And she also can help you with any open access issues that if you want to publish in an open access journal, then talk to her. I'm the data curation librarian, so anything related to data management or data curation, data repositories, I'm your guy. Eric Arnold is our geographic information systems specialist. So if your research has any geographic component, or you want to make maps or some other types of really cool geographic component, then Eric will be happy to help you with that. And then Michelle Brannon is the media literacy librarian, so she can help you with creating any videos or audio files or graphics that uh, you might want to include within your research, or if you want to use some cool graphics and video tools as part of your research, then she can also help with that. So that is it for the data management plans class, and I just wanted to throw up my contact information one more time. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me, or you can also type them into the chat right now, and I'm happy to address those. So thank you for attending today, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll hang around for just a few more minutes and give people time to type questions into the chat if you have any. And but you can also email me later today if you have some questions that pop up later.